The storm rolled in with an eerie calm, clouds swallowing the twilight sky whole, turning the world into a muted palette of grays. Emily sat in her dimly lit living room, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows that danced against the walls, a stark contrast to the growing tempest outside. She often found solace in storms, the rhythmic patter of rain and the rumble of thunder creating a cocoon of sound. Yet tonight, an unsettling whisper brushed against her mind, as if the wind carried secrets that had long been buried. As the first thunderclap shattered the silence, Emily glanced at the window, her reflection staring back at her, eyes wide with a blend of curiosity and dread. The power flickered, leaving her in a shaky darkness, the silence of the house amplifying her breathing. Just then, she swore she heard a low moan carried by the wind, almost human, echoing the loneliness she often felt in her isolated home. The thought that she was not truly alone sank into her bones, a chilling realization that made her heart race with each passing flash of lightning. Each strike illuminated the room for the briefest moments, revealing the mundane objects that now seemed menacing in their shadowed corners. A picture frame hung crookedly on the wall, the photograph within showing a smiling woman who was once her friend, but had vanished under mysterious circumstances years ago. As thunder rumbled again, Emily felt a tightness in her chest, the memory of her friend's disappearance clawing at her mind. She had spent countless nights wondering what had happened, spinning tales of fate and fear, each one darker than the last. The storm now seemed to pull at those threads, unraveling her composure and weaving in dread. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the back of the house, rattling her from her thoughts. Emily's heart raced as she instinctively reached for her phone, the screen illuminating her shaking hands. She stepped cautiously toward the darkness of the hallway, her breath hitching with each creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. What awaited her was not the thrill of discovery, but the suffocating grip of fear. As she realized the feeling of being watched had morphed into something tangible. Rain lashed against the windows, and within it, she thought she saw a figure standing just beyond the glass, a silhouette of the past wrapped in the storm, beckoning her to confront the truth she had hidden away for too long. The old station wagon had sat in the garage for years, a relic of a family that once thrived in a different time. Its paint was peeling, and the interior was overrun with a thick layer of dust that whispered secrets of neglect. Jessica had inherited the vehicle from her late grandfather, and while she felt an inexplicable connection to it, there was a lingering unease. It was said he drove it every day, even after the accident that left him paranoid, swearing that something was always watching him from the back seat. One evening, as twilight draped its veil over the neighborhood, Jessica decided to take the station wagon for a spin. The engine sputtered to life with an eerie gurgle, the sound echoing unsettlingly in the quiet air. As she drove through the familiar streets, she felt an odd sensation, as if the vehicle was steering her instead of the other way around. Her heart raced when she glanced at the rearview mirror, catching a fleeting shadow that seemed to linger behind her. Paranoia crept in, a whisper that perhaps her grandfather's tales held more than mere nonsense. With every turn, Jessica felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing down upon her, as if the car itself was an entity with intentions of its own. The familiar landmarks, once comforting sights, morphed into ominous silhouettes, distorted by her growing dread. She attempted to shake off the feeling, convincing herself that it was just her imagination running wild. However, the shadow in the back seat grew bolder, an oppressive presence that seemed to take on a shape, inching closer with every mile, feeding off her fear. Finally, as Jessica reached an isolated stretch of road, the station wagon seemed to hesitate, the engine sputtering once more, as if to question her resolve. The radio crackled to life, playing a haunting melody that echoed the sorrow of loss, filling the car with an unsettling nostalgia. She glanced in the mirror again, the shadow now unmistakably human, a twisted semblance of her grandfather. His eyes bore into her, a mix of warning and despair, and she realized this was no ordinary drive. The vehicle was a vessel of memories and grief, tethering her to a past that refused to let go. And as she stared into the mirror, the line between past and present began to blur, the road ahead disappearing into the shadows. The old cabin stood alone at the edge of the dense woods, its weathered wood creaking under the weight of 1,000 secrets. No one in town spoke of it willingly, but Marla felt inexplicably drawn to the solitude it offered, a chance to escape the chaos of her life. As she crossed the threshold, a shiver slipped down her spine, but she brushed it off as a draft, trying to focus on the peacefulness that surrounded her. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie patterns on the floor, and for a moment she convinced herself it was just a rustic retreat, a place to gather her thoughts. As night began to embrace the cabin, Marla lit a fire and settled into an overstuffed chair, the crackling flames creating a cozy atmosphere. Yet the shadows danced with an unsettling energy, pulling her focus from her book to the corners of the room. Glancing at the empty windows, she felt a strange sensation, as though a pair of eyes were watching her. But each time she turned her head, the stillness of the woods met her gaze. With a deep breath, she tried to dismiss the feeling, telling herself that the isolation was simply playing tricks on her mind. The forest surrounding the cabin grew restless, and every rustle of leaves seemed to whisper messages meant just for her. She closed her eyes, wishing for sleep to claim her. But the persistent feeling of being watched tightened its grip. In her dreams, she wandered through the woods, the trees morphing into figures that beckoned her deeper into darkness, their whispers turning into unintelligible chants. Each night became a cycle of restless sleep, the line between reality and nightmare blurring until she could no longer tell if she was fleeing from something or toward it. By the time the sun rose on the third day, Marla was a shell of herself, her mind fraying at the edges. She could no longer ignore the truth. The cabin was alive, and it knew her fears, her anxieties. Every corner concealed a shadow of her insecurities, feeding off her paranoia, transforming her solitude into a suffocating prison. In a final desperate act, she attempted to leave, but as she reached for the door, the shadows coiled around her, tight and unyielding, and she realized that the cabin had absorbed her entirely, holding her captive in a web of her own making, a reflection of her darkest self. The library at the end of Willow Lane had always been shrouded in an unsettling aura, as if the very walls absorbed the whispers of the past. Clara, an introverted college student, found solace amongst its towering shelves and dim corners, the smell of worn pages filling the air like a comforting shroud. But something shifted one rainy evening as a chill crept through the open windows, and she sensed a presence lingering just beyond her peripheral vision, a fleeting shadow that danced between the rows of books, beckoning her deeper into the labyrinth of knowledge. As Clara explored the aisles, she discovered a peculiar book tucked away, hidden amongst dusty tomes that had long since been forgotten. The cover was blackened, the title long faded, and an inexplicable urge washed over her, compelling her to take it from its resting place. The moment she opened it, the words seemed to writhe and twist, forming narratives that were disturbingly familiar, recounting her own life in meticulous detail, as if it were a diary of her existence. A knot tightened in her stomach at the realization that every entry ended in tragedy, each page a precursor to a fate she dreaded but could not escape. Days turned into weeks, and Clara became enmeshed in the book's chilling revelations, her mind turning in circles as it unraveled her sanity. Each story seemed to layer upon the last, revealing hidden fears and forgotten memories, amplifying her paranoia until the line between reality and fiction blurred. Friends began to notice her unraveling demeanor, their worried faces becoming faint echoes as Clara withdrew into her world of harrowing tales. The pressure of the looming deadlines replaced with an obsession that gnawed away at her soul. The once comforting whispers of the library now felt like mocking laughter as she struggled against an invisible grip that tightened around her fragile psyche. One fateful night, consumed by desperation, Clara returned to the library, clutching the cursed volume like a lifeline. She confronted the very essence of her fears that had crawled out from the pages, a specter of regret and sorrow that hung heavily in the air. The library whispered secrets she was never meant to hear, the shadows closing in as she felt the weight of her past mistakes and unfulfilled dreams bear down upon her. In that grim moment of realization, Clara understood that the library had not just revealed her life, but also the inevitable end she had unknowingly written for herself, a ghost haunting the aisles of her mind, forever trapped between the bindings of a story that was never meant to be told.